Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Monash. This is the weekend edition where we interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today's no exception. We have a great guest, but first, a quick chat about goal setting. Goal setting is one of the most important aspects to achieving anything in life. If you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. I'd like to invite you to join me for 3 days on the Mexican Riviera for an intensive goal setting retreat so that you start your 2020 with energy, purpose, focus, and momentum. The annual goal setting retreat will take place over the first weekend in December. Registration is now open. You can register directly at victorjm.com/events. That's victorjm.com/events. Or send an email to goals@victorjm.com. That's goals@victorjm.com. We are back here on the weekend edition. We interview notable people from the world of real estate investing. Today we've got a great guest all the way from Ottawa, Canada, my good friend Rich Danby. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Victor. Good to be here.
Rich, not all of our listeners know you, so why don't you take a moment and give a little bit of your backstory in terms of how you went from living the corporate life into the world of real estate investing?
Sure. Well, I've been in broadcasting for 15 years, and I was doing real estate kind of part-time, just taking the money I was earning from my salary and using it to buy real estate. And then over time, I just started to realize that I was potentially making more real estate money per year than I was through my job. And as I was kind of flipping homes and buying properties and renovating them and refinancing, I just realized that the path to wealth was quicker if I just left my job and became a full-time real estate investor.
I love that. It's such a common story. You're working in a very expensive market. And what we're going to focus on today, I know that you've had a few challenges over the last year. And so first of all, thank you for being willing to share some of that. And for the listeners at home, today's episode is really about some of the lessons that have been learned in managing contractors and managing subcontractors. So without necessarily going through all the sort of details, why don't you give a little bit of what you went through this year and some of what you learned in how to manage contractors?
Sure. Well, managing contractors is always challenging. As a real estate investor, you kind of have two choices. You can either hire people to do the work for you and you be their boss, or you could subcontract it out to another company to do all the work. So I've done both. And as I decided to scale up and start a construction company, I thought it made more sense to subcontract out some of the work instead of being responsible for it all myself. So what I decided to do was I started to interview some people and try to find who would be a good fit to take on some of these contracts. Everything would have worked out great, except that the person I hired in this one particular case that you were referring to ethically wasn't in alignment. They were a really good talker. Even though I vetted them, I still ended up in trouble with them because they just were not doing what it was they were supposed to be doing.
Yes. And I know how difficult that can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So starting at the GC level, and then we can work our way down and talk about the individual subs. What were some of the major takeaways that you learned from this somewhat painful experience?
The biggest thing I learned when hiring a company to sub out the work to is do not let them control any of the funds. And what I did in this scenario is this particular individual had, came to me and talked about all their experience and how they had a whole bookkeeping department set up and there was really nothing for me to do. So I figured, okay, you know what, I'll release the funds in phases. So, where's the risk in that, right? So the mistake I made was when I handed them over the initial capital for 6 projects, because I was producing contracts pretty quickly through the clients that I know, I handed over that money. And unfortunately, that's where my biggest mistake took place. So I gave them the money, like about 25% of each job. And collectively, that added up to a lot of money. And unfortunately, this person didn't have the intentions of actually fulfilling the contracts. I wrote up the contract that guaranteed my profit. So I figured, I'd be safe in this scenario because everything's in writing. It says, I said to him, look, if we're going to split the profits on this and share in the profit, then I want to know that you're going to guarantee my profit because you're the person who's controlling the schedule and you're also the person who's controlling the funds. So he said, okay, that's great. No problem. I'll do that. So all the paperwork was signed, non-compete was signed, all the proper documents were signed. I had all of it lined up and legally done. But the issue where I failed was I handed over the initial funds. And when I did that, I immediately bankrupted all of the projects and not even realizing it. And so what I did was I kept pressuring this person to open their books and share with me, because that was part of the deal was, before I release the next payment, you need to show me what you spend the money on so that I can verify these things. And that's when I started to get the initial pushback. So through all of that, the second mistake I made was that I went on vacation, and I thought everything seemed to be going smooth in the beginning, and this person had all the right answers. So I left on vacation and thought, okay, seems like everything's going smoothly. And then when I came back, I found out that I was bamboozled, and nothing that I thought was actually the truth was the truth.
That must have been incredibly difficult, not just for you, but even for the clients, the folks who were depending on you at this point to deliver the completion of these projects that they were looking for in their own homes.
Yeah. And, the ironic part of that is these people didn't sign a contract with the subcontractor. They signed a contract with me based on my reputation and based on my skill set and their trust in me. And so I knew that I had to proceed anyway. The problem was I didn't have any of the money. The money was already in somebody else's hands, and they didn't use it for what they were supposed to. So what I did at that point, initially, when I uncovered all of this, I called a lawyer. And the lawyer said, don't pay anybody. You're not actually responsible. You need to stop making payments, because everybody and their brother at that point had their hand out and they were looking for money. And I couldn't really confirm whether or not the contracts that he had with these people were legitimate or not. But everybody was like, you owe me money, this wasn't paid. And so I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I called the lawyer, and the lawyer said, no, you're not responsible. Those are not your bills. You hired him as a subcontractor. He's responsible to make those payments. And that may well be true, but unfortunately, if I didn't make those payments, then these people would have put liens on the property for not being paid, because this was the property that they worked on as either the plumber or the HVAC or the electrician or whatever it was. And I couldn't let that happen, because a lot of these clients were either flipping or they were trying to add legal secondary suites and refinance. So I just bit the bullet, and I just started writing the checks out of my own account. And so, when you take the fact that all the money that I gave this person was gone over 6 jobs, and these were all fair-sized jobs, like adding a legal secondary suite and renovating the whole main floor. That's not cheap to do, as you know. So at the end of it all, I just bit the bullet. I pulled up my sleeves and I worked for 4 months straight every day, and I just became one of the trades guys myself. I was just in there every day managing it and trying to get it back on track and trying to win the clients back over or smooth them over as best I could under the circumstances. And for the most part, thankfully, I was able to do that. But at the end, obviously, I just didn't focus on pursuing the person who did this to me. And I just decided to focus on only getting the jobs completed and delivering the product in which the clients paid for.
This is the darker side of real estate that sometimes rears its ugly head. It's not talked about. It's not talked about publicly very often. And first of all, thank you for being willing to share it. It's something that every real estate investor, doesn't matter large or small, everyone that I know who's successful in real estate has a story like this, or sometimes even more than one. And it's something that if you haven't encountered this at some point in your career, you probably will. What else did you learn from this?
There's a lot of lessons in that. What I realized is that if you want to be a criminal, hiding out in real estate investment is a really, really easy way to do it. What I learned was that, first of all, I don't have any friends that are criminals. So I wasn't really familiar with the justice system in Canada and how it works. But, I discovered this. This is the unfortunate part. And as I now know this, I'm surprised it didn't happen to me earlier. If you convince people to give you a deposit, let's say 25% of the job, 50% of the job, and when you're in a market like Ottawa where there is a shortage of labor, people are willing to do that. And I'm an investor, but I'm talking about regular people who are not in the real estate industry, who just want to get, they want to get their kitchen renovated or they want to get a basement renovated or something like that. When they go and get quotes, if they even bother to get 3 quotes, often they're looking for the cheapest quote. And in that case, if that happens, they're willing to put up whatever the amount of money is that the contractor says. If the contractor says, I need 50% up front, some people are willing to do that. If they say, I want 25% up front, they're willing to do that as well. And if the quote is lower, they're definitely willing to give that some serious thought, even if there are a few red flags that come with it. So what I realized in this scenario is if you're a criminal, and hopefully you don't have a lot of criminals listening to this, or any for that matter, but this is the best industry to be in, because if you go around quoting jobs and pretending that you're an ethical contractor, most people are not checking the references properly. They're not doing their proper due diligence. They end up going ahead with it anyway. So, imagine if, you're quoting $100,000 jobs and, you quote 10 of them and you get 5 of them, and, you're collecting $25,000 for each one. Now you have $125,000 in a very short period of time. The other part is getting references is really not that hard. And this particular person, the way that they got their references was that they gave a little bit for free to somebody in exchange for a reference. So the person said, well, what, you're not going to charge me extra for that? No. Just give me a great referral. And so this person would do that on small jobs. And then I would call these references, and the references would say, oh, this guy's the best thing since sliced bread. He's absolutely amazing. But they feel they need to reciprocate the kindness because the contractor who I'm calling about had given them something for free, right? So references don't always check out either. And then the jail time, here's the ironic part. This guy's actually in jail now, and I'm not the one who put him there. He's ripped off so many people, and I uncovered it all, unfortunately too late. He's ripped off so many people that he's in jail right now serving an 18-month sentence. And I found out that he was eligible for parole after serving only 1/3 of his sentence, and that he'll be released automatically after serving 2/3 of his sentence. So imagine the average person, they work a job, maybe make, $75,000 a year. It would take them almost their entire career to accumulate $500,000 in tax-free money through their hard work and effort. If you are in the construction industry and you have no conscience, that's the key part there, no conscience, you could make $500,000 in a year by just collecting deposits and pretending to, look the part. And when you do go to jail, first of all, not everybody pursues. They don't pursue because they know that they find out that you don't own anything, you're not worth anything, and they've already lost a ton of money. So they don't want to throw, good money after bad. And these guys, they just get away with it and they keep doing it. And it's a very unfortunate thing. And in my case, I feel fortunate in the sense that, you can, we were talking about this earlier today, is like, you could drop me off on any street corner anywhere in the world and I would figure out how to make money. So I'm okay. I'll be okay. And I had some net worth to start with. So, it's not the end of the world. It's definitely a setback, but I'll be fine. But most people out there, they're vulnerable. It's just unfortunate that guys like this exist.
Absolutely. It's a very painful story. It's a painful story to listen to, let alone to have lived it firsthand. So again, thank you for sharing it. I think one of the things that you mentioned is important. A single isolated case of someone being ripped off, if you go to the police, they'll typically tell you, well, this is a civil matter.
Right.
But when there's a pattern, and then at that point, you can often convince the police that it's actually a criminal matter. And at that point, it gets taken out of your hands and the criminal justice system takes over.
Correct.
Which it sounds like it did in this particular case.
Yeah, and it's funny, there's so many people in the woodwork, they're encouraging me to push it and go further with it. There's just so many victims. And when I started doing my research and uncovering a name, every name led to another name. And, so then I'd call the next name and then they would tell me their story. And then they would give me a name of somebody they knew. And it just kept going on and on to a point where I just said, I have to stop. I have to stop now and just focus on getting these jobs done. So yeah, it's not a good situation for anybody to be in. And that's great advice, Victor, about going to the police anyway. And, want to make sure that this guy stays in jail for a very long time.
So for the listeners at home, first of all, thank you, Rich, for sharing the story. The key here is to perform due diligence. Make sure that everything you do maintains tight control over the purse strings. Make sure that when you have subcontractors involved underneath the GC, that there are lien waivers in place before the GC gets any money. Otherwise, you have the risk of the subcontractors putting a lien on the property. There's a process here, the process that the lenders use when they're doing construction jobs. That exact same process is a process that you yourself should be using. And if you miss those steps, if you cut those corners, you often pay a very steep price for it. So again, thank you, Rich. Rich, if folks want to get in touch and they want to learn a little bit more, what's the best way?
Sure. Well, what they could do is they could send me an email at rich@richottawainvestments.com. What I'm doing now, Victor, is I've kind of stopped with the construction for now and just kind of put that on hold. And I'm just getting back to doing what it is that I was doing before, which is investments. So I buy properties and then I match them up with investors. So basically, I'm a connector between opportunity and funds. If they want to discuss any of that, they can reach out to me and I'd be happy to share.
I love it. Well, thank you, Rich. And for the listeners at home, take Rich's advice. He's learned it the hard way. In the meantime, have an awesome rest of your weekend. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.